Miriam Calloway learned early in life that some doors close quietly. No slam, no argument, just a soft click, and then silence on the other side. That was how Dominic Ashford ended things. She was 23 years old. She had been with him for 2 years, not in the loud way that couples announce themselves to the world, but in the steady, certain way of two people who have chosen each other in private and plan to keep doing so. He was already becoming someone important. The Ashford name carried weight in the city. His family owned buildings. His decisions moved money. He was the kind of man people called before they called anyone else. Miriam was a junior event coordinator at a small firm. She had plans of her own, a savings account she fed carefully every month, and a dream of running her own business someday. She did not think any of that mattered between them. She thought what they had was separate from all of that. She was wrong. The night it ended, Dominic sat across from her at a table in her apartment, and he spoke in the calm, measured tone of a man who had already made up his mind and was only there to deliver the news. He said their relationship was not built for the direction his life was heading. He said he needed someone with a certain kind of standing, a certain kind of name. Miriam asked him what that meant. He told her she already understood. She did not cry. Not in front of him. She kept her hands flat on the table and her voice level, and she watched him leave, and she sat in the silence that followed for a long time without moving. 3 weeks later, his engagement to Celeste Vane was in the local newspaper. Celeste came from a well-known family. She was photographed in a cream dress, smiling perfectly, standing beside Dominic outside a restaurant Miriam had always wanted to go to. Miriam did not read the full article. She folded the paper and placed it in the recycling bin and went to work. She moved out of her apartment, stayed temporarily with her Aunt Ruth, and tried to put herself back together piece by piece. She was doing reasonably well at this, until the Tuesday morning 6 weeks later, when she sat on the cold floor of a pharmacy restroom and stared at a small plastic test and understood that her life had just become much more complicated. She was pregnant. She sat there for a long time. She thought about every version of what could happen next. She thought about telling him. She imagined his face when she did. She imagined the conversation that would follow, the negotiation of it, the possibility that he might feel obligated rather than willing. She thought about what it would mean to bring her child into a situation defined by obligation. Then she made a decision. She would not tell him. She would raise her child alone. Not out of anger, though the anger was there. Out of something more protective than that. She did not want her child's first experience of a father to be a man who had to be informed and then convinced. She registered the birth certificate with only her own name. Elara Ruth Calloway came into the world on a Thursday in early spring, small and loud and perfect, with Aunt Ruth holding Miriam's hand and crying more than Miriam did. They named her partly after the aunt who had opened her home without a single question. Miriam looked at her daughter the first time and understood that she would do anything. She would rebuild everything. She would work until her hands gave out, if that was what it took. And she did. Calloway events started on Aunt Ruth's kitchen table. Miriam worked during Elara's nap times, after her bedtime, on weekend mornings before the sun was fully up. She took on anything she could get in the beginning. Small birthday parties, corporate lunches, a retirement celebration for a woman named Mrs. Okafor, who told Miriam she had real talent, and then referred her to 4 other clients. The business grew slowly, the way real things do. By the time Elara was 2, Miriam had moved into her own small office. By the time Elara was 4, Calloway Events was handling mid-sized charity fundraisers and private company dinners. By the time Elara was 5, Miriam received the call she had been working toward for 3 years. The Harmon Foundation wanted her to plan their annual gala. It was the most important event on the city's social calendar. The contract was larger than anything Miriam had handled before. She said yes before the caller finished the sentence, and then she hung up the phone, walked into the small room where Elara was drawing at her desk, and stood there shaking slightly, until her daughter looked up and asked why she looked so funny. Miriam laughed. She picked Elara up, spun her once, and told her that things were going to be very good. She worked on the gala for 4 months. Every detail was considered. The lighting, the table arrangements, the catering coordination, the program flow, the parking logistics. She walked the venue so many times she could have navigated it in the dark. She did not know Dominic Ashford was on the guest list. He had been added late, a favor extended by the foundation's director to a longtime donor. His name appeared in a column of additions that Miriam reviewed quickly 2 days before the event, and she missed it. The night of the gala, she was standing near the east entrance doing a final walkthrough with her clipboard when she looked up and saw him across the ballroom. 6 years. He was older in the small ways that time makes people older. He wore it well, because men like him always did. He was speaking to someone near the bar, laughing at something, comfortable in the room, the way powerful people are always comfortable in any room. Miriam looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at her clipboard, made a note about the floral arrangement on table 7 being slightly off-center, and kept walking. Dominic saw her from across the room a few minutes later. He did not recognize her immediately. He knew only that someone had caught his attention in a way that made him pause. He watched her move through the space with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and needed nothing from anyone in the room. He asked his assistant who the woman with the clipboard was. His assistant told him she was the event planner, the owner of Callaway Events. Dominic nodded. He looked at her once more. Then he let it go. The gala was a success. The foundation's director thanked Miriam personally at the end of the evening and told her they would be calling again. Miriam shook her hand, supervised the beginning of the breakdown crew, and drove home to relieve the babysitter. She sat in her car in the driveway for a few minutes after she parked. She pressed her palms against the steering wheel and breathed. Then she went inside, checked on Alara, and went to bed. 2 weeks later, the foundation called about a smaller follow-up luncheon. Miriam accepted. It was a midday event, low-key, about 30 guests. She had childcare lined up, but Aunt Ruth had a medical appointment that morning, and the backup arrangement fell through. The venue was relaxed and family-appropriate. Miriam brought Alara. Alara was 5 years old and had a habit of walking slightly ahead of her mother in the way of children who believe the world is a place designed for their curiosity. She had her mother's directness and her mother's composure, and no understanding whatsoever of situations that required caution. Dominic Ashford arrived early to the luncheon. He was near the entrance, reviewing his phone, when the door opened. Alara walked in first. She stopped a few feet inside and looked up at the tall man standing nearby with the serious face. She studied him. Children that age do not know how to pretend they are not staring, so she did not pretend. Then she said, "You look like the man in Mama's old photo, the one she keeps in the box under her bed." The small clusters of guests near the entrance went quiet. Dominic lowered his phone. He looked at the little girl looking up at him. She had her head tilted slightly to the side. She was waiting for a response in the patient way of someone who has no particular reason to be nervous. Miriam came through the door a moment later, with her bag on her shoulder and a folder in her hand. She was mid-thought, looking down, and then she looked up. She saw Dominic. She saw her daughter standing in front of him. She saw the 30 people in the room who had stopped their conversations. Everything became very slow and very clear. Alara turned and pointed at Dominic and looked at her mother. "Mama, is that the man from the photo?" Miriam did not speak. Alara turned back to Dominic. She considered him for another moment with complete seriousness. Then she said, "Are you my father? Mama said I have one somewhere. I just never met him." No one in the room made a sound. Dominic Ashford stood completely still. He was a man who had spent years in rooms full of important people, navigating pressure without showing it. He had no skill that applied to this moment. He looked at the child in front of him. He looked at her eyes, the shape of them, the angle of her jaw, the way she held her head. Something in his chest moved in a way that felt like walls coming down inside a building that had been constructed to keep them standing. He looked at Miriam. Miriam looked back at him. Her face was composed. Her hands were steady. She did not confirm what her daughter had said. She did not deny it. She looked at him, the way a woman looks at someone who no longer holds any power over her life, and hasn't for a long time. She walked to her daughter, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and said quietly that they would talk later, and that right now, Mama had some work to do. Alara accepted this without complaint. She found a chair near a window and began drawing on the blank back of a program she had picked up. Miriam ran the luncheon. Every course arrived on time, Every guest was comfortable. She smiled when she was supposed to smile, and moved when she needed to move, and did not look at Dominic Ashford more than twice for the remainder of the event. He did not leave early. He requested a meeting 3 days later. He sent the message through a formal email to Callaway Events, which struck Miriam as both appropriate and quietly absurd. She read it twice. She showed it to Aunt Ruth, who read it without a word, and then asked Miriam what she wanted to do. Miriam said she would meet with him, on her terms, at her office, with Aunt Ruth present. He agreed to every condition. He sat across from her at the small round table in the corner of her office, and he asked, carefully, why she had never told him. Miriam had thought about this question for 5 years, in the private way that people think about things they expect they will eventually have to say out loud. She had her answer ready, not as a weapon, but as a truth. She told him she had made her decision alone in a restroom when she was 23 years old, and she had understood in that moment that her child deserved a parent who was present because they chose to be, not because they were informed and then felt they had no option. She had looked at what he chose when he was given a choice, and she had decided she would not place her daughter at the mercy of obligation. Dominic did not argue. He thought about arguing, and then he looked at the woman across from him and understood that there was nothing to argue against. She had been right. He had shown her exactly who he was. She had believed him. He asked for a DNA test. She agreed without hesitation. The results came back and confirmed what Ilara's face had already told him in the entrance of that luncheon room. The news reached Celeste in a way that Dominic had not controlled. Someone who had been at the luncheon had talked, the way people always do when they witness something that feels historic. Whatever conversation followed between Celeste and Dominic, it ended things between them that had already been ending for a long time. Dominic did not rush to Miriam with any of this. He understood, slowly and without comfort, that it was not her problem. He hired a family attorney. He began the legal process of being formally recognized as Ilara's father. He did not ask for custody. He did not make demands. He asked Miriam, in writing, with clear and careful language, whether she would allow him to begin to be present in his daughter's life, starting from whatever she considered acceptable, moving only as fast as she was comfortable with. Miriam read the letter twice. She showed it to Aunt Ruth, who was quiet for a while, and then said it was Miriam's decision, and she would support whatever she chose. Miriam thought about Ilara, not about Dominic, not about herself, but about her daughter, who had walked into a room full of strangers and asked the most honest question she knew how to ask. She thought about what it would mean to say no, and what it would mean to say yes, and where the line was between protecting her child and limiting her. She wrote back. She said yes. Supervised visits to begin. A slow process. Her boundaries would be clearly stated and consistently respected. He agreed to everything. The first visit was awkward. Ilara regarded Dominic with the measuring look she gave most new people, then decided he was acceptable and showed him her drawing notebook, page by page, providing commentary on each picture that he did not always understand, but listened to carefully. He showed up to every visit after that, early, each time. Ilara began to call him by his first name, which she pronounced with full seriousness. Some Saturdays she called him Dad. She made the choice herself, on her own schedule, and neither adult said anything to influence it in either direction. Miriam watched from a careful distance that grew slightly less careful over time. Not because she had forgotten anything, not because she believed the past had been rewritten, but because she had made a decision that this chapter was not about her history with him. It was about her daughter's future with a father who had finally decided to be worthy of the name. Callaway Events was featured in a regional business journal that autumn. The headline called Miriam one of the most promising entrepreneurs in the events industry in the city. Ilara saw the article and asked if she could take it to school for show and tell. Miriam said yes. Ilara carried the folded page in her backpack for a week before she remembered to actually bring it out. Life did not become a different kind of story. It became a fuller version of the same one. Miriam still worked late some nights and still got up early every morning. Aunt Ruth still lived across town and called too frequently and was never once unwelcome. Ilara still drew in her notebook and walked ahead of her mother in open spaces, and ask questions with the fearlessness of someone who has never been given a reason to stay quiet. Dominic was still learning. That was the honest thing to say about him. He was a man in the slow, unglamorous process of becoming better, and he did not always get it right, and the work was not finished. But he showed up. That was where it started. That was, perhaps, all that could be asked of anyone. The city kept moving. The seasons turned. A little girl who had once walked into a room and asked the truest question she knew, grew another inch, and lost another tooth, and laughed more than she cried, and called her mother her best friend, and sometimes, on Saturday mornings, let a man with serious eyes read to her in silly voices that he was still not very good at. And Miriam Calloway, who had once packed her life into boxes in 2 days and rebuilt it from a kitchen table, drove to work each morning through a city she had quietly helped shape one event at a time, and she was not waiting for anything. She had already arrived.